Okay, so today we are talking about relative identity, specifically the monohumanity objection. Now, it's usually formulated as such. They'll say something like, if under relative identity you count one God, three persons, then if we counted consistently using relative identity, we would be counting one human and multiple persons. So there would be one human being, and we would all be different expressions of that same human being. What's the first error with this? Well, the first error is that it fundamentally misunderstands what logic is and what logic does, what modeling does specifically. So for one, logic does not impose rules, metaphysical rules, right? It doesn't impose them. It only permits them to be expressible in the language. What do I mean? Well, let me give you an example. Let's take a grammatical rule or a grammatically correct sentence, and let's say Juju is filming a YouTube video. Now, that doesn't impose a rule, right? But from that, we can derive whether or not it's grammatically correct. According to the rules of English grammar, it is correct. Juju is filming a YouTube video is a grammatically correct statement or sentence, right? But it doesn't impose anything metaphysical, right? It's not telling me whether or not it is actually true that it is the case when I ask the question, is it grammatically correct, right? It doesn't tell me whether or not there's one Juju or two Jujus in the world, right? Because it's not laying out principles for individuation, right? It's just telling me there, at least informally, that there's at least one person or one thing called Juju, that Juju is filming a YouTube video. Logic functions structurally identical. It's structurally identical in how it functions, in that logical systems are like a grammar, like an English grammar system, where we take things we want to say in natural language and then we try to formalize it and see if it's consistent. If it breaks the rules of English grammar, it's inconsistent. Just like in logic, if it breaks the rules of the formal system, it's logically inconsistent. But that's not a method of counting, because the logical system does not impose metaphysical rules on things. All it does is allow us to express the statements that we have and we're trying to express formally. I hope you realize how this objection has nothing to do with relative identity. If it's an objection at all, it's going to be an objection to the metaphysics of the Trinity, right? It's going to be something about the world about which we ordinarily count or individuate things or divide things into subgroups or whatnot. That has nothing to do with the logic. Again, the logic is used to express the statements in question. So you take the statements, you assume them, and you try to see if the logic can hold them consistently, just like a grammar in the English language. If I want to say Juju has $1 billion, it's not true, but I can verify whether it's grammatically correct, right? Same thing. If I want to take the Trinitarian statements, the Father is God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God, they're not each other, and I want to see if they're grammatically correct, the equivalent here is logically consistent, I can take them and try to formalize them and whatnot, and it turns out they are logically consistent. So let's get to the real heart of the matter. Is there a metaphysical issue? Now first, let's clarify what the person is demanding who makes this monohumanity objection. Well, they're demanding that everything has the same counting criteria, right? Well, it's so dumb, it's hard to even explain why it's wrong. I mean, let's take a very simple example. Why am I and a car different as opposed to why am I and you different, right? Is it the same criteria? Well, obviously not, right? Me and a car are different because a car doesn't have a rational nature, right? It's not a rational animal, for one. That would individuate me and a car. But me and you what individuates me and you, because we both do have rational natures, is going to be a different criteria. So there's two criteria. Well, what individuates a car from a cup? Well, a car has things like wheels and doors, a cup doesn't. So there's another criteria. So we already have three different criterias. Well, what individuates a house from a skateboard? Well, a house is somewhere you live, for example. A skateboard is not. There's another criteria, right? Everything has different criterias. When you take different objects, they have different identity conditions, right? So I don't understand this whole thing of, well, there's like this principle that we just universally apply to everything. That is not true. Now, what they're implying is that when we usually count natures, for example, we say there's a human nature, and we say there's one human nature, but we count individual persons, we count distinct human beings, meaning instances of human beings. So it comes down to whether or not God can be said to be a universal or something of that kind. A universal in the sense of passive potency that can be instanced and multiply individuated in its instances. Obviously not, right? The whole history of Christianity is a history of divine simplicity, for one, right? Which holds that God's essence is identical to his existence, which stops all of that. God cannot be universal. God cannot be multiplied, right? So it's a question about the metaphysics. Notice, it's a question about the metaphysics, not about the logic. So really what they're asking then is, why do we count, what in your metaphysics causes us to count God as one God and three persons when, for example, when we would count humans, since there's still one human nature, but there's three human beings, what causes you to count it that way? And we can answer that very simply. Well, God, or for example, there's multiple reasons you could answer, or multiple ways you can answer this, but I think the most common response that should be given, because most Christians hold to it, is divine simplicity. We have metaphysical reasons, or we have reasons to hold on to that metaphysical position, divine simplicity, in that itself would stop the sortal G from being multiply instantiated. It's just not possible considering the metaphysics. So that's what we would say. So it's not a logical issue. It's a question about the metaphysics.